On today's Prophecy in the News, we're going to discuss dragons. According to Revelation chapter 12, there will be a war in heaven between Michael and his angels who fight against what the Bible calls the dragon. And the dragon fought and his angels and prevailed not. In fact, verse 9 goes on to say this great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan. A reference back to the Garden of Eden when the serpent beguiled Eve. The question is this a metaphor, or is Satan really a dragon? Gary Stearman is here to discuss with me, do you believe in dragons?
Well, you know, J.R., virtually every culture on earth has some belief about dragons. If you go back into the old literature, you find that the dragon of the Far East is called the lucky dragon or the fortunate dragon. And this, in spite of the fact that he is said to have lost his wisdom in ages past, and he's in search of it, and one of these days he's going to catch up with it, eat it, swallow it like a pill, and then he'll regain his former strength. Well, we know when he lost his strength, right after that encounter in the garden. But one by one, cultures all over the world, including Europe, by the way, have beliefs in dragons, and they have historic dragon lore. Of course, everybody's heard of St. George and the dragon, the knight in armor who slew the dragon, and we've all tended to believe these are mythological stories. But well, J.R., we believe in dragons, or perhaps we need to.
Well, let me ask you a few questions about this, Gary. The article that you've written will appear in our March magazine. And you have researched this for some years now,
yes,
so this is no new subject to you.
That's right.
Cultures across the world have believed in dragons from time immemorial, back when there were no telephones or newspapers. Where did these people get the idea if dragons as... first, I guess I should ask, do you equate dragons with dinosaurs?
Well, in a way, I do. And in another way, I don't. And we'll make that distinction a little later.
Well, if the dinosaurs haven't lived for 50 million years, as the evolutionists say, that's my point. Where'd all these tales about dragons and these humongous monsters come from nearly every culture throughout history if they weren't around with man?
The fact is, if you study paleontology, and you start digging down and coming up with fossils, a huge majority of those fossils are saurians, or lizards, the great reptiles, some of them 60, 70, 80, over 100 feet long. Thunder lizards, they're called. And J.R., they seem to have had a father in ages past, and he was called the anointed cherub that covereth. He's now called that old serpent, the dragon, and Satan, after his fall. But certainly, the evidence suggests that he was always a serpent, even before his fall, and that he was the guardian over the serpent class of creatures. Now, when he fell, they fell. And today, serpents are just a flimsy shadow of their former self. You have horned toads and little lizards and snakes, and they're considered sort of the scourge of the earth, you know?
Yeah, that's amazing to me that you dig up these bones of giant dinosaurs, and today the only thing's left is about that long, you know?
Yeah, just a little tiny, Texas horned toads, they're called, or horned frogs. And formerly, those grew to be very huge. Well, I think that this happened on the earth at the time of Adam and Eve, before the Great Flood. I think wiped them out. Certainly they existed at that time, and some people have suggested that plesiosaurs, or marine reptiles, lived through the flood, because they could have remained afloat and lived through it. And some have suggested that, for example, the famous Loch Ness monster, or the monster of Lake Champlain in New York, which is called Champ, or the monster of Lake Okanagan in British Columbia, which is called Ogopogo. Some have suggested that these may be the remnants of a great class of marine reptiles which used to dominate the waters, but were taken away in the Great Flood and now are just a very shadowy remnant of their former selves.
So you would say that the dinosaurs, at least the marine dinosaurs, or actually the T-Rex and the whole 9 yards of them, if I can use 9 yards.
9 yards is
how
just
about
fine.
359 yards?
Big.
Died in the flood of Noah.
Yeah. And as a matter of fact, there seems to be great evidence for this, and for a tiny remnant yet surviving in lakes, in rivers, and in seas. For example, several major ocean lines captains over the last couple hundred years have reported sea monsters. They call them sinewy, scaly creatures, sometimes up to 200, 300 feet in length. They could rear their heads out of the water almost half the height of the masts on the old square riggers. Giant sea monsters have been reported by men who were used to filling out their log books and swearing upon what they filled out in those log books. So I'm convinced that something does exist in the waters, and for want of a better term, we'll call them dragons. However, the Bible devotes an entire chapter to just this beastie, as he's called in England. The English, the Irish, the Scots refer to him as water beasties or worms, or they shorten that and to orm. I have a book here called The Great Orm of Loch Ness. Orm is just a shortened form of the word worm, which is the old Anglo-Saxon wyrm, which is their way of saying dragon. And so Nessie, the water beastie, a dragon.
Now, Gary, I've got to ask you this question.
Okay.
With all of those sightings, and even in recent years, sightings, why has no one been able to document it? Actually get a photograph that can be documented. I know there are photographs.
Yes.
Very, very few, but...
Well, in our latest magazine, we've included 2 photographs that are reputed to be authentic. And I happen to believe they are. There have been some notorious hoaxes. But I also believe there have been some photographs. But these monsters are fleeting, leading me to believe that they are the miniature progeny of the great dragon, Satan himself, and that during this age in which we live, they have been, shall we say, repressed, kept back. They live in secrecy because it's not their time, but their time, I think, is coming when that fight, that great battle will be fought in heaven. I think all the forces of the dragon will come forth again.
Well, you know that in the last 40 to 50 years, our nation and other nations have developed submarines to a science.
Absolutely.
And are presently, you know, going through the oceans. There have been all kinds of creatures that have been discovered, but no dragons.
No dragons.
Are you saying that they have a certain intelligence apparatus? They are able to elude us?
Yes, they do. I'm saying that when you're talking about water monsters, water horses, orms, worms, whatever you want to call them, snakes, serpents, we're not dealing here with an ordinary genus of fauna. We're dealing with a special creature that has an abnormal intelligence and that may in fact even be guided by the master dragon himself. And may have the ability to disguise itself, to disappear in some way. And so we're talking about a creature that is real and yet it's almost ghostly.
Interdimensional?
Possibly, if you want to use a fancy word, possibly able to wink in and out of existence. And its existence has been documented.
It has to be a spiritual type.
A spiritual creature, almost, yeah.
Just as the Bible calls him Lucifer, or Satan, or that old dragon, the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world.
J.R., I want us to, as we're moving up to a break rather rapidly here, but in the remaining seconds, Job 41, a whole chapter, is 34 verses long. The whole chapter is devoted to a creature called Leviathan. And when you read Job 41, you discover you are reading about the very creature that people report today in lakes and rivers and oceans the world over.
There are actually 5 places in the Bible where the Leviathan is mentioned. We're going to be talking about those when we come back in just a moment. Gary, this concept of the dragon, if he is able to elude through some spiritual means, is it possible he will show himself during the tribulation period? I mean, literal, physical?
I think that's very much a possibility. I really do. Since he is a spiritual creature and since his father, the great dragon himself, has been momentarily taken out of the way, but I believe will appear during the tribulation. I think we're looking at something very possible.
You know, China has for centuries had the dragon as its motif.
Yes.
In fact, several Far Eastern countries have. And it's interesting to me that they are the people, the very countries, nations, the kings of the Far East who will come to the battle of Armageddon. It'll be the dragon against Jesus. Incredible, isn't it? History's about to repeat itself. Well, we'll be back with more in just a moment. Right in the concluding chapters of the book of Job, God and Job have a conversation. And one of the main subjects is the dragon. Gary, tell us about it.
And this is Job being interviewed by God, and this is God speaking. And he says in chapter 41, verse 1 of Job, "Canst thou draw out Leviathan with a hook, or his tongue with a cord which thou lettest down?" Of course not. Obviously not. He proceeds to describe Leviathan to Job. Leviathan has tight scales. They're sealed so tightly against each other that nothing can get through them. When he sneezes and snorts, light shines out of his nostrils. He can set fire with his breath. Now this is God talking to Job. Leviathan's musculature is said to be of unusual strength. His heart is described as strong as a stone. When he rouses, men become weak and fall to their knees for no apparent reason. He breaks iron and brass as easily as rotten wood. And this concluding verse, "He beholdeth all things." He is a king over all the children of pride. J.R., this entire chapter, chapter 41 of Job, to me is a picture of God telling Job about his greatest marine creation, if you will. This is the king of the waters.
Yes.
This is Leviathan. And there have been literally thousands of reports from people all over the globe. You're talking about Australia, the waters of Australia, but it's all over the world. People see these things, they're frightened to death, and usually they keep their mouths shut.
Yes, across the midsection of Australia, there is a dry lake bed. It used to be underwater, and it's the greatest treasure trove of dinosaur bones and fossils on the face of the earth. And plesiosaurs, these water dinosaurs, have been found with their long necks and their flipper-like fins, every bone intact. And yet, in recent years, sightings along the northern shore, the eastern shore, the southern shores of the continent, these water creatures still evidently are still alive, still there.
You know, in the very beginning of the book of Job, when Job's sitting in a heap of ashes, and he says, "I wish I had never been born." In fact, he says, "I wish I had a bunch of magicians right here, right now." This is Job 3:8. "And I wish that they could summon up Leviathan, and he would gobble up the sun, and it would get dark, and the whole day would be dark." Job uses that figure of speech to say, "I wish there were no day." And of course, there are literally dozens of myths, people all over the world who associate the dragon with eclipses of the sun.
But isn't it interesting, Gary, that Job is the book where the devil comes before the Lord and he and God work out a deal to torment Job.
To torment Job. And don't you know, the devil was having fun along about the 3rd, 4th, 5th chapters of Job when he was wishing he had never been born. Satan was probably saying, you know, he's going to weaken, he's going to break.
Yeah.
But he didn't.
And this 41st chapter, especially the last verse, tells us just who that Satan is.
Exactly.
He's a Leviathan.
So really you have Leviathan in chapter 3 of Job and in chapter 41, and of course there he's presented as an earthly creature. Now, but he's also a spiritual creature, and I have to point this out, that it's always been believed that through the incantations of magicians, serpents can be summoned up, including the dragon. It takes us back to Egypt, you know, and the priests of Pharaoh who summoned up the serpent.
Yeah.
So we're talking about a class of spiritual creature here.
Job is a prophecy. Job is a type of Israel who has suffered more than any other nationality of people down through history. We come to the end and God shows up in a whirlwind and fire. Gary, that's the second coming. And of course the subject at his appearance to Job is, what he's going to do to the Leviathan. And it's going to take God to do it because men can't.
Absolutely. When God talks about the great natural creation, he's discussing it in terms of ruling over this earth, of reestablishing the kingdom. So all of these are prophetic utterances. Leviathan, by the way, is discussed or mentioned by name 5 times in the Old Testament. We've just talked about 2 of them in Job. There is a wonderful reference in Isaiah 27, and J.R., this one is amazing because it really talks about, I'm going to turn over here while we're talking.
You know, where he talks about it, from the context of Isaiah, the last few verses of chapter 26, first few verses of 27,
right,
it's obvious that he's talking about the end time and the tribulation period.
He really is. Isaiah 27 talks about Leviathan in a very special way. As a matter of fact, this is Israel in the kingdom. And we read in Isaiah 27:1, in that day the Lord with his sore and great strong sword shall punish Leviathan, the piercing serpent, even Leviathan, that crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea. There's that sea dragon again, the sea monster.
And it's obviously a reference to Revelation chapter 13, this monster that rises up out of the sea with 7 heads and 10 horns, and is a composite of the dragon's work down through history, and the whole world worships him, and the Bible says the dragon gives him his power and authority.
That's right.
Amazing. How can the dragon, i.e. Lucifer, give a world government, which is obviously the picture there of this monster with 7 heads and 10 horns, how can Lucifer give him the power and authority to take over the world? Is it his to give?
Absolutely. I think there is every evidence between the pages, the front cover, the back cover of the Bible, and all the pages in between talking about the man, the great anointed cherub, Lucifer, the bright star, who became the fallen serpent, but yet is still the leader of the principalities and powers and rulers of darkness in high or heavenly places. In other words, J.R., he has some kind of claim to this forsaken planet that will not be quit until that great battle that's described in Revelation.
Obviously, the Psalms have something to say about Leviathan. Gary, tell us about it.
Oh, the Psalms really do, J.R. As a matter of fact, Psalm 74:14, and let's see if I've got it here. 74:12 through 14 says, "For God is my King of old, working salvation in the midst of the earth. Thou didst divide the sea by thy strength. Thou breakest the heads of the dragons in the waters. Thou breakest the heads of Leviathan in pieces, and gavest him to be meat to the people inhabiting the wilderness." You know, J.R., there is a Jewish celebration in the Jewish calendar that reminds us of this.
Yeah.
In the Feast of Sukkot, or Tabernacles, when the Jews live in little tabernacles festooned with the fruit of the vine, and remember that one day they will be dwelling in a fruit-bearing paradise. It reminds them of the kingdom. They have a celebration in which they visit their little booth one last time, and they recite this in Hebrew: "May it be that we merit to dwell in the sukkah," or the booth, "made of Leviathan." In other words, they're praying. One of their Sukkot prayers is, one day God is going to destroy Leviathan, and they're saying, may it be that we might be blessed to live in a tent made of the skin of Leviathan.
How about that?
Now, that seems like a strange prayer to us, and yet it fits Psalm 74 perfectly, because God is said to break the heads of Leviathan in pieces. In other words, there's something that's going to be broken, and I don't think it's pure myth. I think that something, certainly the nations, the world system will be broken, but there seems to be an actual beast behind the scenes that'll be broken too.
Yeah. In Psalm 87, there's a reference to the dragon called Rahab. Not Rahab the harlot, but the dragon, but Leviathan itself. The very term Leviathan is not used there, but it is used in Psalm 104. And the prospects of that representing the middle of the tribulation period is awesome, Gary.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, looking at Psalm 104, JR, we have an amazing figure here in the 26th verse. And it says simply, "There go the ships. There is that Leviathan, whom thou hast made to play therein." And of course the discussion here is of the sea and of the ships of the merchant traders in the last days. And of course we know from the book of Revelation that these traders are destroyed, their systems destroyed in one day. And Leviathan seems to be their power. That is, he's the power behind the throne.
Yeah, the ships and the Leviathan are associated there in the same verse.
They are.
That's incredible.
It certainly is, JR. You know, in 1987, they ran Operation Deep Scan in Loch Ness. And you know what they found? After spending millions and with hundreds of boats, they swept the entire lake with the latest high-tech equipment. They got one blip. That's some unidentifiable something that quickly swam out of view. That's it.
Almost trans-dimensional.
Almost.
Ability just to disappear.
Absolutely.
Well, that's like the devil, all right.
Certainly is.
He has that ability, and he's after your soul. So I ask you to trust in Jesus as your Savior. We'll be back in just a minute. Gary, I'm really interested in this Leviathan in Psalm 104. There go the ships, there is that Leviathan. That's got to be a reference to Revelation 13.
Revelation 13, the ships, the merchants of Tarshish, the commercial Babylon destroyed in Revelation 18. Leviathan, of course, a reference to Revelation 13, and the beast out of the sea that's empowered by the dragon. It's all right there in verse 26. One little verse says it all, and what it says is that God is going to raise up a spiritual creature that controls an earthly kingdom. But it also says there is a real physical creature called Leviathan that runs through the waters of the sea. And so what we have here, JR, is a very curious creature that's both physical and spiritual.
Yeah. You know, Gary, thinking back to that serpent that beguiled Eve, that was the dragon, wasn't it?
Yes.
And you know, the curse that was given is actually being carried out by snakes today. They crawl on their bellies and eat dust. I mean, and they're hard if they cannot hear.
Can't hear.
And they're deaf. And this is to me, it has to be real. Cannot be just metaphoric. All you have to do is look at serpents today, and certain species of serpents have little knobs where on their bodies where obviously appendages used to be.
Vestigial little stumps where legs used to be. And also Leviathan is said to be a scaly lizard-like creature. And he's modeled after the great dragon himself. And so, you know, we have angels and demons, and we have Satan able to materialize in this world for a time. And I think Leviathan may be of the same ilk.
And it is kind of interesting that they're the ugliest things on the planet.
And frightening.
That's what I mean, yeah. Just ask any lady.
All right, that's true.
I tell you, this is an interesting subject. One of these days, though, the dragon's going to be cast into the lake of fire. This is J.R. Church and Gary Stearman. Until next time, keep looking up.
Prophecy in the News is a viewer-supported ministry sponsored by our many friends across America and in your area. For your gift of $10, you can receive a special edition of our current programs on audio tape. Or for a gift of $20, we'll send you our programs on videotape. For either order, add $3 for shipping and handling. And to order, call the 800 number on your screen right now.